Coming to you live from Radio Cayman Studio.
For the record.
For the record. Hear from your government officials, independents, and the opposition on issues that matter to you. For the record. Engage in an open dialogue between residents and lawmakers.
For the record.
For the record. Informative, impartial, insightful.
This is your talk show.
1-800-534-8255. Your calls, your input. This is For the Record. And now, your host, Orit Connor.
Good morning and welcome to For the Record. Today being Friday, the 16th day of June 2017. Friday. Some people will say, thank God it's Friday. And for those of you who are saying that, you're going to have a long weekend because Monday is a holiday as well. I want to thank you, our listening and viewing audience, for allowing Radio Cayman and by extension For the Record into your homes, into your vehicles as you traverse the busy roads of the Cayman Islands, into your places of work, whether it be an office cubicle or if you're working in the outdoors. Of course, For the Record is a show produced by the staff and the management of Radio Cayman, and it is geared towards keeping you abreast of issues as they arise and play out on the local, regional, and international scene. I am your host, Orit Connor, and you're welcome to join me every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from 7:30 a.m. until 9:30 a.m. Our phone lines are always open. There is always someone there waiting to take your calls. Normally, it is that beautiful radio voice of Miss Susan Watson, and you may have missed her a few days. She just took a break for a while. You can call us on our toll-free number provided courtesy of Flo. That toll-free number is 1-800-534-8255. You can also call us on 949-8037 and 949-6990. Of course, if you don't like to talk on the telephone, then email us at For the Record. That is one word, For the Record, at candw.ky. I have no co-host with me this morning. Dr. Steve Macfield is engaged in court proceedings, and Miss Teresa is traveling. She's just jet setting. Got WhatsApp from her. Greetings from Frankfurt. Boarding to St. Petersburg in 10 minutes. Sending you, Ezard, Steve, and our audience pleasant greetings for the weekend. And I responded, safe travels and enjoy. So she is going to be in Russia. Yes. Folks, first of all, before I introduce our guest, I want to say, of course, the Queen's birthday honors will be awarded this weekend as well. And I want to extend my congratulations to Mr. Charles Watler, who receives the MBE, and Mr. Philip Rankin, who receives the Queen's Certificate and Badge of Honor. I think is that what it's called? Certificate and Badge of Honor. So I want to extend my congratulations to them as well. My only problem with that is that we see the numbers dwindling every year in terms of the number of persons in the Cayman Islands who get it. We do realize that these are all spread out throughout the Commonwealth, but at the same time, I believe that if we were to submit more requests, we would probably get more honors. Of course, there are some people who don't wish to have that honor. We have seen in the UK, for instance, where people have declined the acceptance of it as well. So that happens. So with that, I'm going to introduce my guest this morning, none other than Mr. D. Ezard Miller, the Honorable D. Ezard Miller, the leader of the opposition in our Legislative Assembly. Mr. Miller, good morning, sir. Welcome back to For the Record.
Morning, Mr. Connor. Good to be here, and look forward to an interesting morning. But I think part of the problem with the Caymanians and the so-called Queen's Honours is the way they have been reduced in value and significance by having by certain people who Caymanians certainly regard as not being entitled to them. Mm-hmm. It's rather like the silk for the QCs and the law firms. It always would be seen to be going to the wrong people. For years, I nominated people from my constituency, people like Dr. Melda McCoy and Miss Nettie McCoy, who have a lifetime of service to the community and the country. They never got anything. So, I'm one of those who I think turned it down twice because it doesn't mean anything to me. There's not many. There's some of us who, most of the people who sit in executive council wind up getting OBE before they leave. I would much prefer to have Cayman honors that we and again, part of the problem we see with that is that so many are being given out that it kind of reduces the value of them.
Yeah, well, in terms of the Cayman honors, sorry, and I want to certainly applaud the then Premier, Honorable W. McKeever Bush, who introduced the Cayman honors. We haven't seen that continue. I know the protocol office, we engaged in the design of those honors. That was done through GIS, and Mr. Charles Gilman and his staff did an excellent job in designing them. That has not continued. And the numbers, I believe what happened is because we were playing catch up, there were so many people that we wanted to have these awards during their lifetime and not posthumously, that we gave out a lot of them. So that may have given the appearance that they were devalued because so many people were getting them. But we were trying to play catch up, as far as recognizing people for their service and their accomplishments in the Cayman Islands and being recognized by their own Caymanians, as well. So that may have appeared that way.
But this was the whole point of creating the National Heroes Day, which is the last Monday in January, when we would have had the recognition of Caymanian at various levels for their service to the country. But we spend time on and not suggesting that the various topics that we've done, tourism, agriculture, etc., are not worthy of the subject. But again, I believe that because we've made it so broad yet so specialized, right? The significance of something like the top Cayman honor is being in my view, devalued. Because I would, Heroes Square was intended for our national heroes, and the way it's designed is to be able to put a bust, two of the national heroes statues, a bust in each corner of the Hero Square, and none of that has happened. And part of the original plan in 2003 was that every year we would have put one up, and there would have been tremendous celebration of that one individual.
Yes.
And so I think we need to get the whole thing reorganized, and we also need to do a better job of managing Hero Square. It's just terrible that the fountain is not maintained properly. It's on sometimes, it's off sometimes. Those kind of things just need to be done properly. The place is not maintained properly. Some of the lights are not working, and then we use it for all sorts of things. I mean, when we built Hero Square was to honor people, and it was by us who did it, to consider basically very important and historical ground with the names and everything on it. And we built Celebration Park on the other side. We put in Celebration Park, right? There is a pipe in the ground, right, that is covered up with bricks that you just have to pick them up for Rotary Christmas tree. Yet every year we dishonor the people in Hero Square by putting a Christmas tree in it when we have the facility on the other side. But nobody seems to use these things the way they were planned. We have political meetings in the square again, which in my view is wrong. We need to get back to paying due homage and recognition to those people who are listed in there as nation builders, and we need to get back to honoring our national heroes properly and having them clearly identified and due respect. And there should be a bus of the national heroes there with plaques that indicate why they are national heroes. So the place that school children can visit and see our history. But hey, I'm just
Okay, I think we have one caller. Let's go to the phone lines. Caller, good morning. Welcome to For the Record.
Good morning, O.C.
Good morning, sir. How are you?
All
Devil
right.
incarnate.
Honorable Miller,
Yes, sir.
I can start off with the reporter.
Uh-huh.
They got on page 10 on Wednesday paper. Got me listed as captain.
Uh-huh.
And I want to correct that I was not a sea captain. I was captain of soccer and foot and cricket.
Cricket,
but
yeah.
I think they talk about sea captain, so I want to correct that. I could call it, make them correct it in the paper.
Yeah.
Talking about the awards, years ago, I was nominated for OBE.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what I was offered? Badge of honor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
And
yeah,
I
yeah.
didn't accept it.
Yeah.
And we is two Caymanians that I know didn't accept it. Me and Miss Gwen Bush.
Mm-hmm.
If that's all they had for Caymanians, they could. If I was nominated for something that gave me that, it would be a different thing.
Mm-hmm.
And when Mickey was started, the other day, he gave me an award. I was very proud of it.
Yeah.
So
But we need to develop our own awards, and we need to recognize our own people. We shouldn't wait for somebody across the pond to do it for us.
and I think it's long past. This just I know we got more holidays now than Puerto Rico. But I think we should put a day one side for seafarers holiday or
I remember we did it. Remember I did it in 2003 in the quincentennial. We converted, I think it was Constitution Day to Seafarers Day, and the hope was that would have been continued, but it wasn't by the powers that be for whatever reason. I am still not aware why they didn't do it, but that was the intention. We changed the name of it in 2003 to Seafarers Day, and it should have continued going forward.
Yeah. All right, then. You all have a blessed day.
Thank you for calling,
if
sir.
I can continue listening.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ivan. Before we move on to your role as leader of the opposition, and we look at our constitution to see what it says about it and your experiences, so far. Also, want to mention what is disturbing is that those local honors were developed. They were handed, given to people, awarded to people, and then all of a sudden it falls away. So what is the value of them? You would expect that there would be, once that was developed, that is something that should not be changed. Yes, you may want to change the design of them, but all of a sudden, the commander and the various levels that we had, they're no longer there. Whatever medals and stuff we had, they're probably somewhere in the protocol office collecting dust at this point in time.
Which again shows that we're not serious about it. The order of the chronological or order of authority, whatever we want to put it should be national heroes, and then the other Caymanian honors follow under that, and somewhere down below we put these things that come from England across the pond.
Yeah.
Right? And the people who should be honored are the ones who have the Caymanian honor, should be foremost in all of our presentations, like the birthday celebration on Saturday. If people show up there with the honors local honors that were created, is there any significance going to be paid to them? Although the invitation say you must wear them, but what does it mean if it hasn't been continued? Because I think the last time they were done was, what was it, in 2012 or 2013?
Somewhere around there, yes.
Right.
2012.
And again, you see this unfortunate political divide into things that where politics has no place.
No place, yes, yes.
And
yes.
we need to resurrect it, and I think we need to do a much better job of respecting those who have been honored at whatever level in Cayman.
Okay, folks, we're going to take a commercial break now. When we return, we will be talking with the Honorable D. Ezard Miller, Leader of the Opposition, about his role as Leader of the Opposition, what he sees his role being as well as what our Constitution says about the role of the leader of the opposition. So please stay tuned. For the record, we'll be back shortly. Good morning. Welcome back to For the Record. In the studio with me this morning, Honorable D. Ezard Miller, leader of the opposition. Mr. Miller, let's start by looking at the relevant section of our Constitution as it relates to the position of leader of the opposition. I think that's section 68 of our Constitution. And can you, for the benefit of our listening and viewing audience, tell us what it says, sir?
Well, basically, I don't know how to force, I can't quote it verbatim, but basically what it says is that the leader of opposition is the person that has the majority of the, well, let me quote it. 68 says, there shall be a leader of the opposition who shall be appointed by the governor. The governor shall appoint as the leader of the opposition, A, the elected member of the Legislative Assembly recommended by a majority of the elected members of the Assembly who are members of any opposition political party whose numerical strength in the Assembly is greater than that of any other opposition political party. B, if it appears to the governor that there is no such party, but there is an elected member of the Assembly who would be acceptable as leader of the opposition to a majority of the members of the Assembly in opposition to the government, that member, or if it appears to the governor that there is no such person, then the governor shall appoint as leader of the opposition that person who in his or her opinion would be acceptable to the greatest number of members of the Assembly in opposition to the government. Let me just take a pen there.
Sure.
So my appointment is under B,
Okay.
68B.
Right.
It appears to the governor that there is no such party, but there is an elected member of the Assembly who would be acceptable as leader of the opposition to a majority of the members of the Assembly in opposition to the government, that member. I was elected by the 6 members, and we sent a letter to the governor signed by the 6 of us saying that I was to be appointed, and she swore me in down at the Legislative Assembly.
When was that letter sent? That was when the form
Before swearing in.
Before swearing in.
Yeah,
but
we
once
did
we knew that the government was going to be formed.
Right. Yes. Yeah. So that's how I because we're not in a political party. We are 6 independents who've come together to represent the country.
Now there are provisions for deputy speaker as well.
Deputy leader of opposition. Yes.
Deputy leader of the opposition.
Yeah, I will get to that in a minute.
Okay.
Okay. It says if at any time between the polling and a general election and the next following dissolution of the Legislative Assembly, the governor is satisfied that if the office of the leader of the opposition were then vacant, he or she would appoint to that office a person other than the person then holding it. The governor shall revoke the appointment of the leader of opposition. 4. The office of the leader of opposition shall also become vacant. A, if for any reason other than a dissolution of the Legislative Assembly, the holder of that office ceases to be a member of the Assembly. B, when the Assembly first meets after a general election. C, if the holder of that office becomes a member of the Cabinet. Or D, if the holder of that office resigns it by writing under his or her hand addressed to the governor. 5, the governor, acting in accordance with the advice of the leader of the opposition, shall appoint a deputy leader of the opposition from among elected members of the Legislative Assembly in opposition to the governor. The office of deputy leader of the opposition shall become vacant. A, if his or her appointment is revoked by the governor, acting in accordance with the advice of the leader of the opposition. Or B, if any of the circumstances specified in section 4A, B, C, or D. In this section, opposition political party includes a group of members of the Legislative Assembly in opposition to the government who are prepared to support one of their members as their leader. So you don't have to be a political party.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Okay. Now, when we look at our Constitution, that basically outlines it there. But there is more to that post that isn't addressed in our Constitution. Is there any legislation that addresses
No.
that?
But one of the disappointments of becoming leader of the opposition was that as I began to inquire, well, what is the role of the leader of the opposition? What precedents established? There seems to be none, other than there is some salary that is awarded to the leader of the opposition, which apparently is a military secret, because nobody. The disappointing thing was that once I became leader of the opposition, the governor or the deputy governor, under whose purview the Legislative Assembly currently fails, was not in position. Was not in a position to hand me a sheet of paper, a document that says, this is what goes with your appointment as leader of the opposition. This is your salary, these are your benefits, these are the roles that you will be expected to perform in the community. For instance, there are statutory committees, statutory established committees and boards under which the leader of the opposition is involved in appointment in two ways. One is the governor may appoint or shall appoint a member of a board on the advice of. That means that if I recommend Orit to be on that board, she has to take that recommendation.
Right.
The other method is by consultation with. So she could say to me that I'm thinking about appointing Mr. Orit to a board. And I could say, well, I disagree with that because I don't think Mr. Orit has A, B, C, D, E or whatever. And I would ask you to consider as an alternative this person B because of these reasons. She doesn't have
Not
to take
obligated
that
to,
advice.
yes.
She can still appoint you because that was her original choice. But all of this needs to be in some kind of a document that establishes the precedent and what you're entitled to. Protocol. At what point is the leader of the opposition referred to? In most countries, it is Speaker, Premier, or Prime Minister, and then leader of the opposition. Here, you might get mentioned, or you might not get mentioned. It happened both ways. And so, one of the things that I am trying to do is I'm trying to find out all of these things and put them in a document that I can then discuss with my supporting cast, the other 5 members of the opposition, and say, listen, based on my research and based on what I can determine, these are what I believe needs to be put in this document that establishes the role of the opposition in the Cayman Islands. Right?
Would that form part of, in any way, the standing orders of the Legislative Assembly, that it should be in there, or should it be will it be a separate document?
I am not sure at this point whether it should be. That's probably one good place to put it. But we certainly should have a document, right? And where it's attached to, and whether it's an order that is made in cabinet to say this is the role of the opposition, that needs to be determined. But one of the things that I hope to do is to develop the role properly, and to have so that the next person who becomes leader of the opposition, when they get sworn in, they can be presented with this portfolio and say these are the things you're expected to do.
Folks, I want to remind you that you're listening to For the Record. I'm your host, Art Connor. My guest in studio with me this morning, the Honorable D. Ezard Miller, Leader of the Opposition. When we return, we will talk more about the post of Leader of the Opposition, and we will discuss whether or not the role should be left to convention or whether it should be codified somewhere in our standing orders or elsewhere, so that it clearly outlines what the proper role of the leader of the opposition is. Please stay tuned. For the Record, we'll be back immediately after the news. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. In the studio with me this morning, the Honorable D. Ezard Miller, Leader of the Opposition. We're talking about the role of the Leader of the Opposition, which Mr. Miller has assumed following the elections and the swearing in at our Legislative Assembly. Mr. Miller, we have looked at 2 constitutions in particular, not including our own. We've looked at the Jamaica Constitution Order. Section 80 of the Jamaica Constitution speaks to the post of the Leader of the Opposition. We also looked at the Turks and Caicos Constitution, which also speaks to the Leader of the Opposition, but it doesn't give any more information than we have in our own, which in many instances we see constitutions, especially for the overseas territories, cut and paste from other constitutions as well. So all of the operational issues relating to the Leader of the Opposition, obviously either by convention or through some other document other than a constitution, other procedures are laid out. Now, before we go to discussing that, in 2001, when it was necessary for a boundaries commission to be established, and the UK then introduced an amendment to our constitution, calling members of executive council ministers, creating the post of leader of government business, officially creating it at that point in time, as well as the post of leader of the opposition. That was done primarily because the appointment of the boundaries members of the Boundaries Commission had to be done through recommendations made by the leader of government business as well as the leader of the opposition. So that is almost the genesis to our post of leader of the opposition. When we look at our 1959 Constitution, there is nothing in there in relation to it. We look at our 1972 Constitution, nothing there either. I don't know, you've seen several drafts of constitutions that never came into effect in the Cayman Islands, and whether or not, I don't know if you recall if any of those address the post of leader of the opposition.
No, I don't think they did. I don't recall in 92. But remember, it was also in 2001 when we had the change in government that brought this stuff in.
Yes.
That also saw the arrangement of our Legislative Assembly into the accepted Westminster system. Prior to that, only the government, the cabinet, and the official members sat on the left of the mace, or the crown of the mace. And everybody else, whether you was a backbench supporter of the government or in opposition to the government, you sat on the right-hand side of the tail of the mace, so to speak. It was only in 2001 that we now have the correct format of seating in the Assembly, where you have the government, the front bench, as it's called in parliamentary vernacular, which is the cabinet ministers, and their backbench support sitting behind them. Prior to 2001, the backbench support of the government sat on the other side, right? And you have the opposition, led by the leader of the opposition, who sits in the chair opposite that of the premier, and the supporting cast for the leader of opposition sitting on the right or the tail of the mace. So that, again, is maturity and progress, you know.
Okay. And you're speaking of the mace now when you're looking from the speaker's position.
No, looking coming in the front door. Looking towards is facing the speaker, right? The crown of the mace is to the left, right? And the tail is to the right. And the premier sits next to the crown, and the leader of opposition sits next to the tail.
Okay.
And again, it goes back to in many of the Westminster systems, the opposition is more kindly referred to as the government in waiting.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
You know.
And now that you mention that, if you're the government in waiting, then shouldn't that government in waiting be prepared to assume the reins of government in the event of a vote of no confidence or some other change that takes place? And can you tell our audience how you are now going about preparing your members of the opposition to take up the reins of government if it becomes necessary?
Yeah, well, I think part of the role of the leader of opposition and part of the opposition is to provide training and development opportunities for members on that side to prepare them for the role of government. So I have started out by announcing a shadow cabinet. And, you know, people may not think that is of any great significance, but it is. And we've established it this way. We have agreed collectively that the leader of opposition, who is myself, will shadow the premier and the deputy governor with their responsibilities in the Legislative Assembly. The deputy leader of the opposition will shadow the Minister of Education, Youth, Sports, Agriculture and Lands. The member for East End will shadow the Ministers of Commerce, Planning, Infrastructure, Tourism and Transport. The member for Bordentown West will shadow the Ministers of Public Finance, Development, Financial Services and Home Affairs. The member for Georgetown Central will shadow the Minister of Community Affairs, Culture, Housing, Environment and Health. and the member for Savannah will offer his advice and expertise across all ministries. Because again, we need somebody who has that seniority and that knowledge and that view to assist all of the ministries. I am blessed with in my view, what is a good combination of experience, youth, and expertise. And that I have myself, Mr. McLean, Mr. Anthony, who are senior, long experienced members. Most of us have 16 years or more in actual parliament. Then we have young people. We have Mr. Alva Suku, who is the kind of the bridge, who now has 4 years experience, including 3 years as a councillor. So he understands a little bit about how cabinet works, etc. And then we have two new ones, Mr. Kenneth Bryan and Mr. Chris Saunders, right? Now, part of me giving them these responsibilities is so that they will have an opportunity to develop their knowledge base on the subjects that we have assigned to them. And also, I don't expect them to simply be a reactionary group where we only respond to proposals put forward by government. My plan includes the opposition looking at an issue like labor, for instance, right? And developing what we will call white papers or a document that we can publish. We can come to your show and say, listen, this is how we feel the government should address labor, and let the public know that, and there's a public discussion. And then the only way then to influence the government formally is to move a private member's motion to achieve that. And then there's discussion with the government, and the government either accepts or rejects the motion.
Okay.
So I want to spend a lot of time in developing these young people, and also preparing them for the inevitability of becoming a minister. They will understand some of the areas of responsibility, and more importantly, or just as importantly, when the government presents a bill on labor, right, the person responsible for labor, who in this case is myself, will be speaking from a position of knowledge, because we'd have spent the time in the group developing our position, and it's just not waiting on the minister to present the document and then you get up and talk about the minister, right? Which happens far too often in our legislative assembly.
And it means also that you can certainly divide the work and responsibilities so that not everyone has to go down or before they go down to the legislature, prepare comments and speeches on every subject if you have delegated certain responsibilities. Now, when we look at the classic definition of a shadow cabinet, it says a shadow cabinet is a group of politicians who hold a political post with their party, but whose party is not in government. That is an opposition party. A member of the shadow cabinet is a shadow minister. The leader of the shadow cabinet is called the leader of the opposition. So that is exactly. Now, you have explained what shadowing means, and that will certainly prepare the person who is shadowing.
Yeah, I mean,
to make them familiar with the
give
topics.
Another example. Although I'm the leader of the opposition, if the topical issue is related to finance, the spokesman that the media needs to call in my group to do with finance is Mr. Chris Saunders. Now, we will have met prior to that, and we will have agreed certain overarching positions and principles, but he's the one that has the responsibility and the knowledge base in which to respond to that. So they will be the spokesman for those areas as well. It will not be all had to be filtered through me, you know? And I just think that gives them the opportunity to develop and be a better representative for their constituency.
Now, if the opposition is seen as the government in waiting, one of the issues that I see where you have all independents who are in the opposition, what are the practical possibilities of forming a government? Does the nucleus of that opposition remain solid enough so that you're in a position to move right into government without? Obviously, you don't have the numbers to make up the government or to make up ministers. So you would need to have people from either the other side or whatever. But is the group cohesive enough that you know that at least we have this number with us, and all we need to add is to add to that number?
Yeah, I mean, it's obvious that if I've named Mr. Saunders the Minister of Finance, Development, etc. If there's a change of government and this group moves into government, he's already familiar with what's going on, and he would be the obvious choice to be that. Now, how tight can you wind a group?
Yes.
It all depends, in what's being offered on the other side and whether they think the grass is greener, right? But at least I believe I have a responsibility to the group that I represent to develop them in these areas, and if there's a change in government at the next election, those would be, for instance, if we come out as a independent people to run in the next election, it's obvious that if Mr. Saunders wins his seat in Georgetown West, which part of my job is to make sure that he does, right? And we have 10 seats for the government, the country would be expecting, because they've heard his positions on finance and public finance and development for 4 years. They wouldn't have heard Ezra's position of what they believe Mr. Saunders' position should be. So the public,
and his position reflects that of the group as
exactly,
well.
And the basic whole broad. So part of his campaign would be that if I am elected, I will be the Minister of Finance. You see? And I think we need to get to that stage instead of just leaving it that it's this free-for-all and these external forces outside the political arena who control everything come in and influence everybody and pull them away.
Now, how much of this then we need to ensure that is enshrined in our Constitution?
But I don't know that we need to expand the Constitution to greater define the role of the leader of the opposition. But I think both positions needs to be better defined. I think the role, responsibilities, and duties of the Premier and what that benefit package is or what the awards are for going out on the hustings and becoming Premier should be documented. And it shouldn't be a situation where I get something extra because I'm able to domineer the position more or I can negotiate better. These things should be formalized in a document. So I think both the position of Premier and the position of leader of opposition needs to be more formalized and documented so that the general public, not only the people in the position, knows what the roles are. And this can be taught into the primary schools and as part of the civics lessons. But if it's left and nothing is ever defined and written down and recorded as the standard of how these things are going to work, then there's nothing that you can teach people about, because it depends on what I'm willing to demand and what I will accept. And that shouldn't be the position.
Yeah, it shouldn't be personal to holder.
No, exactly, no.
Yeah.
No.
Folks,
it should be personal to the post.
Right.
And when you get that post, that's what you get.
Folks, I want to remind you that you're listening to For the Record. I'm your host, Dorrit Connor. My guest in the studio with me this morning, the Honorable D. Ezard Miller, Leader of the Opposition in our Legislative Assembly. Please stay tuned. We're going to a commercial break. When we return, the conversation will continue. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. In the studio with me this morning, Honorable D. Ezard Miller, Leader of the Opposition. Mr. Miller, you mentioned earlier about the order of precedence, and there are two concepts. We have order of precedence, and then there are countries that have the order of succession, as well. In the United States, for instance, it tells you if the president is no longer in a position to function, then who comes after that? Vice President, then the Speaker, then the Secretary of State or whatever after that. Our order of precedence, the last one approved by the Cabinet of the Cayman Islands, puts the governor on top, the Premier, the President of the Court of Appeals, the Chief Justice, the Speaker of the Legislative Assembly, the Deputy Governor, Deputy Premier, Cabinet Ministers, Attorney General, Ministerial Council chairs, and the Leader of the Opposition. Put way down. The Leader of the Opposition is way down in relation to Attorney General, Ministerial Council, then the Leader of the Opposition. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11th place on the ladder, the rung of the ladder in relation to that. So the ones that come before you, ministerial council chairs, the chairperson of the ministerial councils.
Well, they don't have that.
Don't have that, yeah.
But I don't know, they might, obviously if they got it, it's approved by cabinet, that exists. So, so that's another position that we don't know about. So what that says is that protocol would then dictate in addressing an audience that it would be the governor, premier,
president of a court of
appeal, chief justice, speaker,
deputy governor,
deputy premier, ministers, councillors. So they have the Attorney General below councillors too.
Above councillors.
And then councillors. And then leader of opposition.
And then the deputy speaker after that. Then elected members of the Legislative Assembly, justices of the Court of Appeal, national heroes, puisne judges, cabinet secretary, financial secretary, chief officers, government officers, or heads of department rank, of head of department rank, honorary counsel, as well. So that is that's
absolutely amazing. In that here you have a constitutional position of leader of opposition. You have a non-constitutional position of councillors being given precedence over a constitutional established position as leader of opposition. Because the whole concept of councillors is unconstitutional. The very section that they're relying on talks about persons, not persons. So we know that that's wrong.
Well, maybe that's why we end up with this thing that speaks to ministerial council chairs.
Who they are, we don't know, right? Those are the kind of things that I hope to get ironed out, and not that's not. This is not intended to be personal to me, but we need to establish what is the normal protocols in Westminster form of government. And certainly, if you look at all of the other countries that have established the position of leader opposition, it comes much higher than it comes. To my knowledge, it certainly comes before unconstitutionally or illegally appointed positions which don't exist in the Constitution.
So Mr. Miller, tell us a little more about your desire to modernize our legislative assembly and to put it in lockstep with other legislative assemblies or other parliaments as far as being up to speed is concerned.
Yeah, you know that I have long been an advocate for the separation of the legislative assembly from the executive, because you cannot be, and on our constitution, the only checks and balances on a runaway executive is the legislative assembly, in that they have to come there to get all the funds approved, they have to come there to get the legislation approved, unless it is subsidiary legislation such as regulations that can be made in cabinet and are not subject to either negative resolution or affirmative resolution as a parliament.
Right.
And one of the things we need to do, I thought we had done it in 2016, because we finished the legislation draft in April, and the motion that the government had brought to create and separate the legislative assembly from the administrative arm of government, executive arm of government, never got presented to Parliament. So I'm hoping that can be resurrected, right? And then I think we need to put in place the other protocols that establishes those functions, so that the functions and those are the kind of things that are necessary if we are going to maintain our democracy. The idea that because the cabinet or the premier has the number of votes to pass anything, that Parliament is just regarded as just another inconvenience, right? Has to stop. We need to get, in my press release as first press release of the opposition, a call on the government to consider meeting weekly or bi-weekly, so that Parliament is more relative. Well, Legislative Assembly, because we're not allowed to call it a Parliament, you see, but I use the terms interchangeably.
Yeah, okay.
and we need to separate the Legislative Assembly, because the Legislative Assembly, being the checks and constitutional checks and balance on a runaway executive, should not be held at the whims and fancy of the executive arm of government. When it meets, how it meets, what it does, it's just not. Well, I guess I can understand then why the rumor is that they are, or what I've been hearing is that the councillors are actually paid more than the leader of the opposition, and maybe that's why there's so much secrecy around all these things, because they don't want the public to know, right? But I believe I have a responsibility and obligation that if I am giving a responsibility to do a job, I'm going to do the job to the best of my ability. Mm-hmm. I can't, and I'm unwilling to operate in this kind of nebulous, undefined role, right? So one of my first jobs is to try and get the role of leader of opposition established as convention in Westminster form of government dictates that it should be. And in somewhere, well, I guess if that was approved by Cabinet, then I think that sets the precedent in terms of the role of the opposition and the role of the Premier and responsibilities being put in a document that is approved by Cabinet.
Excellent. People have been talking about the number of legislators that we have. There are those who say, "Oh, we don't need 19." We have 19. We have single-member constituencies. It is what we have. The staffing levels at our legislative assembly is something that obviously needs addressing. When it is left for members of the legislative assembly to have to do their own research, whether local or otherwise, and to prepare, it is simply too much. And we see, throughout the world where there are assistants, either they're civil servants or you're given some separate funds for you to fund your own office, mm-hmm. as not the constituency office, but have to have some parliamentary support, as well.
Well, we've gone through a series. Mr. Glidden in 2011 or 2012 recommended the introduction of research people, and that the hope was that we could get people from the law school who needed to be articled, and we could circulate them through the Attorney General's office and other places so they get the necessary legal exposure, right? Mm-hmm. But the staffing levels at the Legislative Assembly is atrocious. It's atrocious. But again, because it's the last thing that's talked about in government, right? Because the ministers want to make sure that they have support staff around them to do the necessary stuff. So that's supported automatically by central government, right? The inconvenience of having to go down to the Legislative Assembly, right, to pass laws and other things is regarded as somewhere way down the bottom of the totem pole, and nowhere near enough attention or recognition as to the importance of the staff and the Legislative Assembly is being paid to.
Okay, we're going to go to a commercial break now. We have 2 callers on hold. We're going to ask those callers to hang tight. As soon as we return from the commercial break, we will take your calls. Please stay tuned for the record. We'll be back shortly. Good morning. Welcome back to For the Record. As promised, we're going straight to the phone lines. Caller, good morning. Welcome to For the Record.
Yes, good morning, OC. How are you?
Fine, sir. Morning. How are you doing?
Yes, not too bad. Good morning to the Honorable Ezra Miller.
Morning, sir.
Yeah, how are you?
I'm good, man. How are you?
Pretty good, man.
That's good.
Mr. Ezra, I have a couple of questions, if you don't mind.
Go ahead, sir. That's what I'm here for.
I would just like to ask them, and then when I finish, I'll just hang up and listen to what you're
mm-hmm. Sure.
Okay.
Okay. Says that what have been done in your position so far with having the Rich report made public, mm-hmm. and 2, what or when would the National Security Council be formed, or any report on what is the position with the national security? Note that with the crime that is escalating on a daily basis in the Cayman Island, in Grand Cayman especially, what are your position on those two questions that I asked? And also, what sort of entitlements are that the churches are entitled to, as far as bringing in vehicles or any other
Judah concessions
that you may be after? I will just hang up and listen to you guys.
Caller, before you hang up, just one thing. I don't know if you listened earlier this week. I did mention the fact that I have copies of a Trade Winds newspaper, and in 1967, Palm Heights Development, your father and Mr. Teppo Turin, and there's a story in there about your father and Mr. Turin, their partnership, talking about the Dander Bakery and stuff like that. And I wanted to know if any family member had an interest in getting a copy of that Trade Winds newspaper. If you do, please give Ms. Susan off air your email address, and I will arrange to have that forwarded to you if you want it. Sorry?
I did that already. I don't know why she didn't give it to you, or she might have missed you.
She might not have been in the studio that morning. It may have been someone else. But stay on the line. She'll get it from you, caller. Thank you very much. Let's take the next caller, Mr. Miller, and then we'll give you an opportunity to answer those questions. Caller, good morning. Welcome to For the Record.
Yes, good morning, gentlemen, Mr. Miller and Mr. Connor.
Morning.
I guess that's the only two in there. So
yes,
anyhow. Now that you have formed your coalition, backbenchers, I guess that's what you're calling it. I want to commend you all for doing that, because it was something that's been lacking and needed desperately for years after, we vote in a government and then the lead government takes over and the backbenchers are basically just there left hanging in the wind. So that's an awesome move, and that shows that there is some unity going on, and that I can say I appreciate. However, to say all of that, I'd like to say this, that we have to deal with this minimum slave wage, the $6 an hour. And maybe we have to count on the backbenchers to push this through and get this for us dealt with. Because to be perfectly honest, if we're going to maintain that $6 an hour minimum wage, then anyone who makes under $10 an hour in this country should not be subjected to paying or contributing to their pension or health plans on a monthly basis. That should be borne 100% by the employer if they're paid less than $10 an hour. That's what I would suggest. Not saying it's something you all might find favor with, but when you look at how people have to, at the end of the day, some people are taking home $3 an hour after pension and medical is withdrawn from it. That's not fair to them. That's very unfair, because you have now businesses who are issuing brand new contracts to their employees and reducing their salaries back down to $6 an hour. And that is, again, an injustice to employees in this country. There's no one policing this minimum wage to see that it's being done right. Employees are not being abused by their employers, and a lot of them are. And that's the saddest part about all of this. We need to grab the bull by the horns with this slave wage and deal with it, because people cannot live on that money in this country. We must come to the realization that they cannot, and something has to be adjusted to assist those poor employees, the poorer ones. And we are important poverty. I'm just telling you this because out of my head, no, you would not believe the amount of people in this country that are living hand to mouth on a work permit. And is that fair to them? It's absolutely wrong. And not only them, our own Caymanians as well are in the same boat. And that's sad. It's almost as if we're impoverishing an entire sector of our community for the almighty greedy dollar of our business owner. Thank you.
Thank you very much, caller. Thank you very much for that, Mr. Miller.
Yeah, well, let me answer the first caller. First of all, I haven't made any declaration or we haven't made any decision on the Rich report, other than my personal view before the election was that it should have been released. Because I can't think of something that is important to that we can't trust the public to see it. And if it's because of whatever mishaps that occurred in government and changing regulations and whatnot, we need to know. So I've always said it should be released.
But we see, if I could comment there, Mr. Miller, we see now the calls for persons who have submitted applications for permanent residency, for instance, to be to join in a class action suit against the government. If that report in any way exposes the government any further, and they realize that is the case, should they still release it? And the other.
But that's a subjective call by those who have read it.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's a factual report and it's based on logic, then the outcome is likely to be the same. So what does the people who can sue get beyond what the court will give them anyway if they didn't know, right? Well, and class action suits are not allowed in our country, as far as I know. That's fine. Let's keep that law so that can't happen, right? But
and there are members of our public who are under the impression that the courts can award permanent residence, and everyone that I've spoken to, I've told them, no, it can't be.
No.
If an application for judicial review is allowed and the judicial review is heard, then there are only instructions that the court can give to the relevant body in terms of their administrative procedures, in terms of hearing an application, but the courts cannot determine the outcome of that application to say, yes, you must grant permanent residence, or
they can only refer it back.
Not, right.
And the board can still take into consideration the elements that the court have identified and still say no,
Precisely. Okay.
And what we need to do is we need to process these things and say no.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That's what we need to do.
Okay.
And the other one was
National Security Council.
Well, I have called on the governor to call a meeting of the National Security Council as a matter of urgency, in order to meet, because I don't know what the National Security Council does. I know I am a member, according to the Constitution, right? Mm-hmm. That the leader of the opposition is a member of the National Security Council. But again, I don't know what to expect when I go to if there is ever a meeting and I get called. What's going to happen when I go to this meeting? Am I going to be handed a folio like I gave my members of the opposition that says this is the roles, responsibilities, and functions of the National Advisory Council? These are the things that we deal with. This is how we come to decisions. This is how often we meet. Yeah, I don't know, right? But all of this should be in the public forum.
Well, I'm looking at the government e-services here, and this in 2009 information that is here, established under Section 58 of the 2009 Constitution, appointments of Mr. Scott and Mrs. Colonel Shaughnessy are for 2 years and are renewable. So the members of the National Security Council, the governor as chairman,
right,
the premier as a member, 2 other ministers appointed in accordance with the advice of the premier as members, leader of the opposition or his designate as member, and then at that time it was Mr. Dan Scott and Ms. Bridget Colonel. The deputy governor is an ex officio member, the attorney general ex officio member, commissioner of police ex officio member, and the cabinet secretary is the secretary to the National Security Council. I don't know,
but it doesn't.
I haven't seen from here what the current composition of the National Security Council is.
But that's what it is, because no change.
I mean, in terms of the individuals appointed. For instance, at the tail end of this,
but the only two
with an asterisk says the premier has advised H.E. the governor and the Honorable Juliana O'Connor Connolly and the Honorable Mark Scotland have been appointed at that time. So this is what the GIS thing says then. Now, Mr. Scotland is no longer a minister, so obviously
4 years ago that needs to be updated.
Some other ministers
are you telling me that? Are you telling me the National Security Council has been in 4 years, has not been reconstituted since that?
Well,
and that's what it appears to be, and that is unacceptable to me.
The GIS website needs to update it if it's there. I'll continue to search and see if I see otherwise, but I see nothing there Let's see if we can find. Okay.
But I
And
mean, these are, in my view, these are important functionalities of our Constitution. My position is that they must be honored, they must be respected, and there must be a formal outlay of what the roles, responsibilities, and functions are, and it must function accordingly. And the general public should be aware of how often it meets, etc., etc.
okay. The other question was in
Because
relation to
with this crime thing, it's you know,
due to
due to concessions, to the best of my knowledge, due to concessions, churches are granted by the financial secretary or his designee in accordance with individual applications. He has that provision under the customs law. I don't think there is any there is any carve out as to say, well, you can get a car, but you can't get a bus or you can get a truck. I think each one is determined by the financial secretary at his discretion under the customs tariff law, and it's based on an individual application.
Okay, we're going to
Some
go.
may get, some may not get.
We're going to go to another break now for a headline news. Please stay tuned for the record. We'll be back shortly. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. We're going to switch gears for a minute, Mr. Miller. Someone mentioned the Rich Report. We want to talk about permanent residents. We want to talk about the acquisition of Caymanian status, the challenges that we understand that some persons are facing in the workforce at this point in time. You have heard us talk here on radio about the issue of Caymanian status and the fact that sometimes we find ourselves second-class citizens in our own country. That seems to be playing out now. We've always talked about the fact that those persons who are granted Caymanian status by the board, they have something to show. They have a certificate to show that they have been granted Caymanian status. Those of us who were born here in the Cayman Islands and acquired Caymanian status as of right, that is by operation of the law as of right, have nothing to show. I can show you my passport, which I obtained under the British Nationality Act, has nothing to do with Caymanian status. I can show you my birth certificate, which shows that I'm born in the Cayman Islands, and depending on the relevant Nationality Act that was in place at that time, I'm either a citizen of the UK and colonies, a British dependent territorial citizen, or a British overseas territorial citizen. But our understanding is that there are some people in the workforce out there who are Caymanians, who are being required by their employers or prospective employers to provide evidence that they possess Caymanian status. That means that they have to go to the immigration department, get a letter from the chief immigration officer acknowledging the fact that they have Caymanian status, despite the fact that when you read the law, they clearly possess Caymanian status. It is almost like, should I say it? The past laws in apartheid South Africa, when South Africa was
I think
an
it's
apartheid state.
I think it's a little bit worse than that, because my argument is that they don't have legal authority to make those demands. They're just making them and nobody's challenging them and nobody in the government is responding to it.
My information is that a prominent person in Cayman, that their child had to provide that. Someone needs to challenge it. But we want to talk more about that. But I want to read something, and I want to see, well, we don't have time to have a contest to see if anyone recognizes it. But this is an opening speech given at one point in time, and I'll tell you later where it was given. And it says here, in order to upgrade the qualification of Caymanians, both in the public and the private sector, your government sees it fit for a special drive in training and higher education, and will ensure that no candidate with the basic qualifications for further training is hampered by lack of funds, to indicate the degree of priority that your government attaches to this policy. this year, and I'll tell you the year after, will be known as the Training and Education Year. Now, some of you will say, well, that could be any year in the Cayman Islands because we have heard that over and over.
Including this year.
Yes. Now, this was the opening speech in our Legislative Assembly in the Cayman Islands on the 2nd day of March, 1977, and that was given by the then Governor, Mr. Thomas Russell. And that year, 1977, was declared as the Training and Education Year. We can say the same thing about this year as well. But there, again, we may ask ourselves the question, have we gone anywhere? How far have we gone if in 2017 we are saying the same things that we said in 1977? How many years that would be? 40 years. In 40 years, we're saying that we're going to ensure that we upgrade the qualifications of Caymanians, both in the public and private sector, that the government will see it fit for a special drive in training and higher education to ensure that no candidate with basic qualifications for further training is hampered by lack of funds. We have heard talk. When are we going to get action? We need to see action in 2017. And how are we going to get it? The people are going to demand that we have it. Mr. Miller, any comments?
Well, I think worse than you, we've gone backward because you don't see those kind of statements appearing in Truman speeches anymore, do you?
That's true too. Yeah.
Or in government policy statements, they're much more vague. I mean, the idea that we can expect that a figure that was set in the 80s, I think it was, or early 90s, of $20,000 for a scholarship is still sufficient today is ludicrous. And certainly we have endured much more criticisms of our education system and whether Caymanians are qualified or not in the last decade than we did in the 70s. In the 70s, you know how hard it was to get a permit? You had to go to Mr. Orman Patton, remember?
Yes.
And because Mr. Benson then passed the Cayman Protection Law, Caymanians got opportunities. Now we don't get any. They simply just go get a work permit, or they hire somebody and they run them out of the office one way or another, or give them a hard time, and then they incorrectly report their performance to the government so they can get a permit. And the government looks at it as a source of revenue now. But before you move on, let me say I need to apologize, which I should have done a lot earlier, that Mr. McLean isn't here because he's dealing with his appreciation party, which is going to be held on Monday the 19th, starting at 4 p.m. at the Heritage Field in East End.
Yes.
And he's going to have entertainment for children and adults. And East Enders, friends, and well-wishers are all invited to that, to his appreciation party.
And I believe one of our callers, last caller, mentioned backbenchers, but backbenchers is that terminology is for those persons who sit on the government side and support the government.
Right,
in your case,
well,
you're talking about shadow
minister. We're all front bench. Once you're a shadow minister or a minister, you refer to as you sit on the front bench of government.
Precisely.
You sit opposite the people facing.
Precisely. Let's take the phone call. Caller, good morning. Welcome to For the Record.
Good morning, Mr. Miller. Or your Honorable Mr. Ezra Miller.
Good morning.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. Stanley Hill here. Oh, see, and I heard you mention, and I think it was Mr. Miller, just repeated something happened back in 74, a Truman speech.
1977. Second day of March 1977.
Okay. Mr. Oh, see, that's the same issue I brought to the Premier last week, and he denied it, that Caymanians did not need to be any more advanced or educated. I might be taking this out of context or saying it out of context, but I was shot down because I said to him that I understand that there's words going around that Caymanians are not that proficient or educated or have certificates or qualifications. I think it was like some 75% of the Caymanians don't have a degree in their working field. And I was shot down for that. I couldn't say anymore because I was talked over, talked down. But I mean, here again, I'm hearing the same thing. And everywhere I go in the corners of Cayman, I'm hearing the same thing. I mean, that doesn't give us the excuse, or nobody excuse to not hire Caymanians. We need to start training them. Saying that, getting back to what you just said about your shadow government, Mr. Miller, or Honorable Miller, Mr. Ezard.
Ezard is fine.
Isn't that similar to what the British government has?
Yeah,
Where
that
you have
is
the House of Lords and the House of Commons?
no. That's a dual cameral situation, which we normally in the Caribbean it's a legislative assembly and the Senate. And the Senate are usually people who are appointed, not elected. But what we have in the UK is you have a shadow government, which is currently led by Mr. Corbyn, and then you have the government that is led by Prime Minister May. And most of the Caribbean countries who follow the Westminster system, and New Zealand and Australia and all those other countries, Malaysia and others who follow the Westminster system, they have a government bench and an opposition bench.
What if you act like Mr. Corbyn, which is the Labour leader?
Right.
You'll be showing some good input in the running of this country if you follow that same rule.
Well, I expect that my group and myself will be able to outperform Mr. Corbyn when it comes to addressing the issues of the country.
Thank you, sir. I always hold you.
That's my expectation of the group, and I think they're quite capable of it.
Yeah, and one more thing I said before you run me off here, the immigration, the courts and our immigration laws. There are no business in our immigration laws.
Well, I wouldn't say that, caller. A person has the right to, if they feel aggrieved by a situation, to go to the courts to have it resolved.
But it's limited things that the court can only, if I recall correctly, in our immigration, comment on areas where the board may have erred in actual law. The subjective decision as to whether you get or not cannot be overruled by the court.
Correct. That's basically what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
Because the immigration had
but it's the same thing. You know, these people we welcome to our shores. They become a part of the Cayman miracle. They do better than the average Caymanian, and now they want to abuse us in all way they can. They make all these threats, you know. But I tell everybody that's what the courthouse is for. You want to go to court? Let's go.
Yes, sir. Anyway, thank you.
But we get frightened.
Keep on doing a good job there, Mr. Miller.
I'm trying.
Thank you very much, caller. We have a couple of questions from our listeners. One says here, do you plan on contesting the 2021 elections? Are you satisfied as an opposition for the remainder, to remain as an opposition for the remainder of the term?
Those are hypothetical
Can you let
questions.
the wider public understand that you refuse to accept a ministerial position in the second negotiations with Mr. Bush, and if he's comfortable with the new government? If you're comfortable with the new government.
You're comfortable with the government's form, and I'm not even comfortable. I got to accept it. But all of that it was said about me during the negotiations, all lies. I was never offered in a position. I did not refuse a ministerial position in the government when Mr. Bush as premier. I was not offered one. That was put together behind my back, and I was invited to the meeting after they decided what was being done.
Okay, I have a few more messages here, but I'm going to switch gears. We're going to take a break first, and then when we come back, we're going to talk about the Caymanian protection law. We're going to talk about the current immigration law, the acquisition of status, and we want to tie that in with these requests or demands that we understand that employers or prospective employers are now making to Caymanians, born Caymanians, that they provide evidence that they possess Caymanian status. Please stay tuned for the record. We'll be back shortly. Good morning. Welcome back to For the Record. We have one caller. We have a lot we're going to try to fit in the next 10 minutes or so. Before we go to that caller, one listener has written and said, good morning to you, and Honorable Mr. Miller. I just heard your comments that this year should be a training and education year, first raised by former Governor Mr. Russell. My brief comment in this respect is education and training are fluid, ongoing processes, and accordingly, every year should be as such. Every year should be an educational and training year to address the current needs of the young and old alike, all the very best. And I agree with that. But we shouldn't have to re-emphasize the concept every year, though. It should be something that happens automatically. And if our educational system is geared in the right way, the formal education part of it, we hear about technical and vocational training as well, then we need to do that. We need to establish some more schools. We need to get Alan Moore and his technical and vocational school up and running again. Preparing people for the workforce, not necessarily, ensuring that they have a certification, because then when you start to rely on that too much, unless you have that, then you can't get a job. But actually preparing people to, for practical work in the workforce as well. Let's go to the phone lines. Caller, good morning. Welcome to For the Record.
Good morning to you, Mr. Musty, and good morning to the leader of the opposition. They're always good to hear on here. As brief as possible, because I know you don't have much time. I just want to ask, I'm glad you spoke about the immigration issue, because I don't think there's anything that requires us to give a person PR or status. I think it says you have a right to apply, but you both do know a lot more than I do about that. But I don't see why we're being taken to court on so many charges. In other countries, they have that situation. We don't have to give people status. We don't have to give. You have the right to apply. I believe that's how it is. But I'm glad you mentioned about civics in the schools and all that. I just thought that our constitution is kind of inferior to Bermuda's, because when you're talking about the powers the governor has to assent to what you're override, I don't think they can do that in Bermuda. I think the governor here sits back mostly, and the members have a lot of power here that we don't seem to have, a lot more. What they want to do as elected by the people. And also I'd like to know, is the overseas territory minister, is that person elected, whether it's in a borough election or not general elections, but a council election or something?
They're usually a member of parliament.
Oh, but so they have been elected?
Yes.
Not and appointed by the prime minister, I imagine.
Right.
I just thought about that point, but I'm glad, and I'm just wondering if we should, when we mention about education too, it works both ways, because sometimes people might be tempted, employers, to put a position that doesn't require any big education, and it frightens Caymanians away who are very experienced at that position. Been doing something like that for years. They're just out of work now, but then you say education, and you put in that it needs a BA degree to clean doors or cut lawn or something like that, just to keep you out. I just wondered if sometimes we overemphasize the need for education. It's very important to talk about that, especially the technical. But I just wondered if it doesn't work the other way sometimes, because it might frighten people away. Well, I don't have enough education.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, caller, for that. You have the whole idea is to have the tools necessary, to do the job.
Maybe allow employers to make too many excuses. If they get educated, came on and go to them, they certify them as being overqualified, which is non-existent. That they shouldn't be allowed to use that at all.
Okay. What I want to do first is make the quick distinction between British Nationality Act and our immigration law. British Nationality Act confers citizenship on you. And in our case, at one time we were called citizens of the United Kingdom and colonies.
Subjects of first.
Yeah, British subjects.
Yep.
Then citizen of the United Kingdom and colonies. Then they called us dependent territory citizen, and then they say, let's remove that pejorative term and let's call you British Overseas Territory Citizen. So that is conferred upon us by the British government. On the basis of that, we get a Cayman Islands passport that says, British Overseas Territory Citizen, and we can graduate from being a British Overseas Territory Citizen to being a British citizen as well. Caymanian status is a product of our local legislation. First, it was the Caymanian Protection Law, which came into effect on the 27th day of March, 19 1972. Before that, I think we had the aliens law and other things. 1972, the Caymanian Protection Law came into effect. When the Caymanian Protection Law came into effect, it created a terminology called Caymanian status, and you either acquired it by birth, you could acquire it by being naturalized or registered as a citizen of the United Kingdom and colonies. Some people were able to also acquire it by going to the Grand Courts here in the Cayman Islands and having a declaration made by the Grand Court that at the coming into effect of the 1972 Caymanian Protection Law, the 27th of March 1972, that they were ordinarily resident and domiciled in the Cayman Islands, and with that declaration from the Grand Court, you were then awarded.
Which was a concession that Mr. Benston had to make
yes.
to the bourgeois, who had all those people coming in here and setting up their financial industries and the money, so that to get a law passed
yes.
to protect the rest of us, we had to bring them in first.
And there was a precedent-setting case at the time that went to the Court of Appeals in Jamaica. Mm-hmm. It was one individual in the Cayman Islands that basically opened the door for that. Of course, the Court of Appeals was correct in that, because that's what we had in our legislation at that point in time. So that is the case. We then had amendments to the immigration to the Caymanian Protection Law, 1977. There were amendments that were done on the 17th day of March 1977, the 10th of November 1977, and the 5th day of December 1977. And those amendments were put in place basically to try to tighten up the procedures. In particular, the 1977 one made a distinction between persons born inside the Cayman Islands and persons born outside of the Cayman Islands. Let me just put an asterisk and say that under the 1977 law, if you were born in the Cayman Islands or of parents, one of whom at the time of your birth was resident in the Cayman Islands, that gave you Caymanian status. So you could have a parent who was resident here in the Cayman Islands, and you were born as somewhere else, and you were born somewhere else, and you acquired Caymanian status. So Mr. Truman Borden and the other members of the Legislative Assembly went ahead to try to correct that. So in the final analysis on the 1977 amendment, a person born inside the Cayman Islands had to have one parent who possessed Caymanian status, and both parents had to be domiciled in the Cayman Islands. If you were born outside the Cayman Islands, then you had to be, in addition to having one parent born who possessed Caymanian status and both parents domiciled in the Cayman Islands, you also had to be a citizen of the United Kingdom and colonies, or a Commonwealth citizen. So, for instance, if you were born in the United States, you may not necessarily be a Commonwealth citizen.
That was one of the amendments that was made earlier too, and it was called the Hadjikate Amendment at the time.
1984.
When they because up to that point, a U.S. citizen couldn't be granted Caymanian status.
That was in the 1980. That was in the 1984 amendment. Right. But if you were born in the United States, let's say, for instance, if you, Mr. Miller, had a child born in the United States of America, because of the fact that you were a British, you were a citizen of the United Kingdom and colonies, then your child born in the United States could get citizenship by descent, right, as a result of that. So that is why they say that you had to be. So 1977, that amendment was put in place to ensure that only those persons with Caymanian connections rights could acquire Caymanian status. Now let's go to the issue at hand. This rumor that we're hearing that employers, including some law firms, I am told, are requiring prospective employees or current employees, to provide evidence that they possess Caymanian status. As I said earlier, if you're granted Caymanian status by the Immigration Board, you have a nice certificate showing that it's granted. If you granted it by the Legislative Assembly through a recommendation by cabinet, you get a nice certificate. If you have status by operation of law, you were born here, you have a passport, you have a birth certificate. That seems to be not to be good enough for some employers. The burden is being placed on employees or prospective employees to present that. I am told that getting that letter from the immigration department can take up to 45 days for them to acquire that.
But on what basis are they, on what legal basis are they demanding this, so they can to prove that you don't need a work permit, or what?
I don't know, and I don't know if anyone has challenged it yet. But I'm told that it takes that long. Now, if that is the case, then something has to happen. Does it mean, if people are going to accept the fact that my employer says that my passport and my birth certificate is not good enough, that employer has several options. So here are some of the options that I would put to that employer. You get someone in your HR department who is capable of understanding the previous laws, the Caymanian protection laws, as well as the current immigration law as it relates to status, so that they can tell you whether or not the person has Caymanian status. If you're a law firm, you should have lawyers there that understand that. If you're not, then you obtain a law firm on a retainer and have them interpret it for you, or you employ a consultant who can tell you whether or not the person, my services may be available if you want to consult. I feel that I know quite a bit about the immigration laws, and my services may be available. I'm not saying that they are. I'm not advertising myself, but they may be available. But something needs to be put in place so that these persons who may get a job, may be in a position to get a job, don't have to wait 45 days to get that, because that may be one of the excuses that employers are making for not hiring Caymanians.
But more importantly, if some employer told me that, I would say, well, you need to project it. You need to tell me the legal basis on which you're arguing about it. Here's my birth certificate. Here's my passport.
And you prove to me that I don't
You
possess.
tell me the legal authority you have to ask me for something else.
Now, I can understand an employer being concerned to a certain extent if they feel that they may be subject to immigration scrutiny. I know even...
No, I'm going to do this.
Yes.
This has to do with this.
I know. I'm finding an excuse.
Course, right? You got to stop finding excuses, people.
I'm finding
This is a means of these same political action groups that I'm complaining about now, putting pressure on government by brutalizing Caymanians once again by requiring some stupidity. And Caymanians should not provide it. Tell them you're not providing it.
Well, it needs to be challenged one way or the other. For those who want to comply with it, then I would suggest that the immigration department and the premier who has responsibility for immigration, his chief officer, put a position in place, delegate someone in the immigration department to deal with these
we
questions.
Can't do that. These people have no right to access.
I understand.
So why
that.
are we going to spend public funds to provide things that they have no right to? If they believe they have the right, go to court and get it established by the court that they have the right to demand something additional proof for me being Caymanian without my birth certificate and thing, and stop acquiescing to these people's stupid demands.
I understand that, but there may be someone out there who really, really needs that job and needs it and they need it urgently, and they may want to comply with
that person from England.
They may want to comply.
That person had come from England because he had to be able to interpret English law and English National Act, and he probably had to be certified by the Home Office that he worked in the British Nationality Act for the last 20 years.
we have
foolishness.
immigration services here in the Cayman Islands that are quite competent to do that as well. I believe so. If that is the situation, if that is true out there, what is happening, please contact us. Let us know that that's what's happening. Send an email to fortherecord@candw.ky, because we want to push this issue. If you are being made a second-class citizen in your own country, then contact us and let us know.
That's not making a second class. That's telling you are not a citizen.
Yeah,
and they can't tell me that.
Class. Do we have a caller, Miss Susan?
Remember the good old days we used to solve those kind of problems with a pint bottle.
Okay, we've been rubbing so long now that we forgot our caller. Not really rubbing. It's a healthy debate. Caller, good morning. Welcome to For the Record. Join the debate.
Good morning, gentlemen.
Morning, sir.
I know someone who went through that situation with a prospective employer, and they had to do it. And Mr. Miller, I understand what you're talking about when you say that Caymanians need to stand up for their rights. The unfortunate reality is that they're not going to, because they want the job and they want to ruffle any feathers, so they, do what is demanded. But ultimately, if we're going to put ourselves in a better situation, we're going to need to stand up for ourselves. It's one of the things that really, really irritates me about Cayman. We accept too much garbage.
Yep. Not me, not known for that.
Yeah, and here we see people demanding, and
but that's what's happening.
And
that is happening.
Yep. And
so,
we sorry, go ahead, caller. I'm sorry.
How? I think we need a legislative fix for this that is going to move us out of this quagmire, because I wish that people would take the initiative to step forward and deal with issues, but they're not doing it.
But the legislative framework is already there. The immigration law says if my birth certificate says I was born in or outside the Cayman Islands of at least one Caymanian parent, I am a Caymanian by right. These people have no authority, in my view, to demand a letter from immigration saying I have Cayman status. It's given to me by law. It's already there.
Caymanians are going to actually do that, then it's not effective.
But there's no need for the Caymanians to do it. You ask me, what is your proof of citizenship in Cayman? Your birth certificate is the most concrete proof.
The birth certificate itself isn't necessarily
proof. Yes, exactly. Right.
Everything.
Mm-hmm.
Why is not?
And that is where the quagmire begins, and what the reluctance of the person.
Well, you explain to me how my birth.
Let him finish. Right.
The reluctance of the person to engage in in friction with a potential employer is not going to happen, right? Because you know why? They don't want to be like me. They don't want to be like you. Now, should they do that? I think so. I understand what you're saying and wanting to stand up for your right, but they're not doing it. They're just simply not doing it. So, what are the possibilities? Just for the purposes of the discussion, what are the possibilities since Caymanians don't want to stand up in that way?
Thank you very much, caller, for that. Mr. Miller, we're over time, but I want to give you an opportunity for some parting comments, and we may have to continue this conversation with this status thing.
I don't see what more can be done in legislation. If I want to be the highest office in this country is a representative of the people. How do you prove you're a Caymanian for that? You produce a birth certificate or your passport.
Yeah, but the birth certificate will say who your parents are. Then you have to go one step forward further, and you need to determine whether or not your parents possess Caymanian status, as well. Remember the only time
we can go back 20 generations, and we can keep saying, but listen, at some point in time, common sense has the rule this. Yeah. And my position is that no employer, in my view, and I'm not a lawyer, has the legal right to demand that I produce a letter saying I have Cayman status if I give him my Caymanian passport.
Yeah.
Do I expect from him as a foreigner when he bring me his documentation from his government that I want 10 generations to prove that he's from that country?
And while that may be a company policy, I believe that when you look at our constitution, that may be fit into our discrimination clause, where you're discriminating against me because of my national origin, because I'm Caymanian.
There can only be two purposes, right? One, so you can discriminate against me because I've proven I'm a Caymanian, or you can be defended that you don't need a work permit.
Okay, we have one call. I think someone from immigration may have called in to clear up something. So let's hear that person. Caller, good morning. Welcome to For the Record.
Hi, good morning, Mr. Connor and Mr. Miller.
Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
It's Samantha Bennett, Deputy Chief Immigration Officer over at Immigration.
Morning, Miss Samantha. Good morning.
Hi. Morning. Listening to your discussion there, and I think it is obvious that this is coming to head where employers are now scrutinizing the nationality of somebody. And I think what we need to do as a department is probably educate the public a little bit more, including the employers.
Mm-hmm.
So, listening to what you're saying, I think it's an undertaking that we have to take to put some more information on the website. As Mr. Miller has said, it's already in legislation.
Mm-hmm.
And I think maybe what we'll do, and I'll look into this with Mr. Smith, is do some workshops, possibly for the HR managers, to explain the difference of, being Caymanian by right or entitlement. So I think that would be the best thing for us to move forward, so that everybody has a little bit of clarity. And if we put the information also on our website of different scenarios, because there are many different scenarios, Mr. Connor, as you know and appreciate, of an individual either being born here or not being born, or one parent being Caymanian, one parent not. And so we really need to put it out there and publicize it. So I thank you for the discussion, and because I happened to hear it while I was in the car, I think it's definitely time for us to do some public awareness and PR on the matter.
Thank you very much. I think that you'll find that to be extremely helpful as well. Of course, they'll probably find another excuse after you do that, as well. So let's take the other caller. Let's take Mr. Miller's paying for the half an hour extra time. Caller, good morning. Welcome to For the Record.
As long as I get my check for the $1,000 and I will pay able to church and all for appearing here.
Caller, good morning. Welcome to For the Record.
I'll pay for the extra half. I will.
Good morning, gentlemen. Thank you very much for taking my call. I know you're in overtime, so I'll be as quick as possible.
Okay.
Mr. Connor, I heard and was following with great interest what you were saying with respect to, obviously, when a person has status as of right, or by entitlement, etc., and not being able to, or being required to obtain a letter, which can take up to 45 days. So my question is, given that the British Overseas Territory Citizen passport is issued to the Caymanians by virtue of their connection to the Cayman Islands, given that is a British passport issued pursuant to the British Nationality Act, is it not possible, sir, to have the status actually stamped in that passport?
You could, yes, you could have it stamped in the passport, and there are several persons who have the status stamped in their passports, because prior to obtaining Caymanian status, based on the fact that they were settled here in the Cayman Islands and under the British Nationality Act, they were able to obtain that passport. So in addition to that, then when they got their Caymanian status, then they had the status endorsed in the passport as well.
Even in such circumstances as entitled persons, such as Mr. Miller, I think, and that might be a quicker process than waiting, even though I agree that generally it's a ridiculous requirement. But it might be quicker than waiting 45 days for a specific letter, which, would obviously would tax the immigration authorities even more in terms of bringing their personnel and so on. So that's one thing. And the other thing I just want to quickly mention, sir, and then I'll hang up, is that one of the things that I've noticed that has become far more prevalent of late, and I wonder about what enforcement is doing with respect to this, is that employment agencies in particular, but generally across the board, people are advertising positions, which when you call and inquire about them, they actually say, this is actually in relation to a work permit renewal, and which is directly in opposition to, or opposite of what is required in law. And, so I just wondered if there's any viable solutions that the general public can look to in respect of that particular problem.
But what you should do is, anybody who's told that by an employment agency, they should immediately write a letter to the relevant board and report the case. Because that's not a genuine attempt to find a Caymanian to fill a job.
Thank you very much.
And the letter should say that.
Thank you very much, caller, for that. And we have heard many candidates on their platform talk about this whole issue of advertisement and stuff like that for jobs, and that is something that we probably have to look at as well. Mr. Miller, I want to thank you very much for being here this morning, folks. I want to thank you for allowing Radio Cayman, and by extension, For the Record, into your homes, into your vehicles as you traverse the busy roads of the Cayman Islands, into your places of work, whether it be an office cubicle or if you're working in the outdoors. I also want to remind you that we are our brothers and our sisters keepers. There is always someone out there who's less fortunate than we are, and I ask you to extend a helping hand to them. If you can't do that, then I suggest you donate to a worthy charity, because we always want to consider those who need, not necessarily those who want. I say to you, have a great day, have a great weekend. Go out to the Queen's Parade if you feel like that's what you want to do, and we hope that the rain will stay away, at least for that portion of it, but we also need the rain as well. Continue to support your radio station, Radio Cayman. Join Sterling, Dwayne Abanks at 12 noon, and as usual, we ask the good Lord to bless these three wonderful, beautiful Cayman Islands.